Nearly 10 long years have passed since the liberals swept in and conquered our lands. Ever since, I've been persecuted for my superior cultural beliefs. I want power again. I've been waiting for a savior. Ezra Klein in the New York Times thinks he might be that savior, arriving with a shiny new manifesto aimed at democratic leadership. And while only you can truly comfort me in these trying times, today, we're reviewing Abundance by Ezra Klein and Thompson to see if they can be the next best thing. But first, yes, Klein is on a non-stop podcast tour for this book. I'm sure he said lots of smart, clarifying things in interviews. I don't give a damn. We're judging the book as a book. If you're setting out to reforge liberal ideology, which, spoiler, you are, then the work needs to stand on its own. Double so if you write for the New York Times. So what is Abundance, actually? The book opens with a sci-fi vision of 2050. We've cured diseases, fixed housing, conquered clean energy, and solved climate change. Techno-optimism is back in style, baby, though they don't really engage with why it died off in the first place. Still, it's refreshing to hear some aspirations from the ever-cynical Democrats. The central diagnosis: modern liberalism has neglected supply. We've gotten decent at redistribution, not so much at actually building the stuff people need. And when you don't build, things get expensive. People get mad. They start looking for someone to blame. This is the main part I do like. It's not economically illiterate utopian fluff. The book doesn't wave the specter of capitalism as demon. It blames decades of cumulative, stupid decisions. Paraphrasing the great Brit monkey, it's not socialism or barbarism, not inevitable contradictions that spell doom for liberalism. It's bureaucratic inertia, misaligned incentives, things we could unchoose. But after the sci-fi cold open and some throat clearing about vibes, the book settles into its real project, a wonky, chapter-by-chapter tour of everything we've failed to build and how we might fix it. Chapter 1 tackles housing. Cities are where opportunity lives, but we've made them unaffordable thanks to NIMBYism. Klein and Thompson are decently YIMBY, not full-blown YIMBY Mujahideen fighters, sadly, but hey, we can take what we can get. Chapter 2 moves to climate. They hate degrowth, which I love, and political vegans, the let's ban meat crowd. They want to build fast. Solar, nuclear, EVs, grid infrastructure, and they want to tear through the red tape that liberalism has spent decades lovingly wrapping around itself. Chapter 3 is about bureaucracy. Liberal governance has become obsessed with process. Equity checks, environmental review, community input, to the point of paralysis. It's well-intentioned gridlock. The solution isn't bigger government or smaller government, it's functional government. A state that can do things. This is the idea of state capacity. Remember that, it'll matter later. Chapter 4 jumps to science and innovation, using Catalin Carrico, mRNA pioneer and bureaucratic casualty, as Exhibit A. The book argues our research system is bloated, slow, and risk-averse, especially towards young scientists. Their fix: fund wild ideas, scrap NIH's 500-page grant forms, and do meta-science. Science about how we fund science. Agreed. Chapter 5 says invention alone isn't enough. We're great at breakthroughs, but terrible at scaling. The US invents, then watches China outbuild us. Their solutions: advanced market commitments, bottleneck detection, wonky but solid. And honestly, if you ask me, that could have just been part of Chapter 4. The conclusion argues we're at a turning point. The New Deal order is gone, neoliberalism is fading, and what comes next is up for grabs. If we want a better future, we need a politics of abundance. Not just fairer outcomes, but more to go around. More housing, more energy, more medicine, more capacity to do things. If we don't do that, the void gets filled by the discontented and the authoritarians they empower. So that's the pitch. What works? Honestly, quite a bit. I actually respect the effort. The core thesis, more stuff good, is simple, but not wrong. More housing means more people can live where they want. More childcare means parents don't have to pick between a paycheck and their kid being raised by the wolves. More clean energy? Maybe we actually beat climate change. Just make enough stuff that shouldn't be controversial. And if I had to pick a flavor of Democrat, Abundance ranks pretty high. Maybe not number 1, but top 3 easy. A Democratic Party that fully adopted the ideas in this book would be a better party, one focused on materially improving lives, not just virtue signaling. I also like the mindset shift. The whole shift from consumer mindset to producer mindset thing, a liberalism interested in production more than consumption, that believes what we can build is more important than what we can buy? Yeah, love that. Correct. Healthy. No idea how they plan to pull it off, but it's a conversation I want to have on this channel. The book also says some important but obvious things out loud. Scarcity breeds zero-sum politics. Dysfunction erodes trust. Liberalism can't just be a faction for better processes, it also has to deliver better outcomes. All that is good, thoughtful, occasionally even inspiring, but it's just not enough. And nowhere is that clearer than in chapter 1 of the book, which kicks things off with housing. You'd think this would be where abundance really shines. The whole book is economic policy, and a YIMBY housing policy is basically its flagship pitch. It literally opens with it, but ironically, out of all the policies in the book, this one felt the weakest. Not because I disagree with YIMBYism, I like YIMBYism. There are a lot of good ideas in YIMBYism, but it's not enough. Now, for the sake of the argument, let's bracket broader questions of political philosophy and just focus on economics. Even here, the book misses the mark. Yes, bad building policy is a problem. Yes, we made it nearly impossible to build homes in the places people actually want to live. All true. But the deepest constraint isn't zoning. It's not red tape. It's land. And it's wild to me that Klein and Thompson never really say that, because land is what's there before you even build anything. Take Singapore. If there's a country that actually does abundance housing, it's them. They build like hell. High quality, publicly supported, density on steroids shit. The Kleinian dream. And yet, housing there is still extremely expensive. Why? Because land in a dense, productive city is ridiculously valuable. You could stack towers all day, but the dirt under them doesn't get cheaper. If anything, it appreciates faster. The more you build, the more concentrated the land value becomes. It's compounding in reverse. Instead of spreading gains, the value sinks into the ground and gets hoarded by the landowners. That's the bottleneck. Even in a future where homes are 3D printed out of tofu and hubris, land is the limit. You can't make more of it. You can only decide who captures the value it generates. And if you don't return that value to the people who need to own the housing, you're not solving the housing crisis. Because if you don't tackle the land bottleneck, all the good policy in the world is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It means jack if rent seekers, people who grow their wealth, not by creating value but by extracting it, capture all of the upside. More progress starts to feel like cheaper houses and richer thieves. Denser cities, still no bread, still no justice. The book gets so close on this. It talks about the transformation of housing into a financial asset, how federal policy made the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage the backbone of American homeownership, how inflation made homes not just shelter, but a hedge against the market. And on this, it's great, but then it stops short of the most obvious follow-up. Why do homes, unlike basically every other consumer good, keep appreciating even when we build tons of them? Because it's the land, Ezra. It's the land. Which, of course, brings us to Georgism. For the roughly 8 billion of you who've never heard of it, Georgism is the economic philosophy that says, you keep what you create, but the value of nature belongs to everyone. If you build a house or invest in a company, that's yours. But if a train station makes your land skyrocket in value, that unearned gain goes back to the community. That's Georgism. So, how do you capture this unearned gain? You tax it. Specifically, you tax the location value of land. Not the buildings, not the improvements, not even really the soil, just the space. That's the land value tax. And it has 3 magical features. It discourages speculation, it doesn't distort economic behavior like other taxes, and it unlocks underused land by making hoarding expensive. People either build or sell. Supply goes up, prices go down. And finally, the housing market starts acting like a market. Now, no. LVT doesn't fix everything. You still need to kill Euclidean zoning, strengthen tenant protections, and some public sector construction definitely can't hurt. It's not a magic wand, but it makes pro-scarcity behavior expensive. Scarcity becomes a luxury. You want it, you pay everyone else for it. Leave land out of the equation, and you're doing surgery without treating the infection. And if you're thinking this sounds too clean, sure. Fair. I can't unpack the full academic literature in a YouTube video. George's theory is deceptively simple but not easy. But if you want more, go watch Brit Monkey's piece on Georgism. Probably the best quick intro. Or, if you're a true masochist, read Progress and Poverty like a fucking nerd. Final note. Georgism isn't some revolutionary fever dream. You still get markets. You still get private property. There are no commissars. You just don't get rich by sitting on dirt. That's a politics you can sell in a country that loses its fucking mind over estate taxes. And a politics Ezra and Thompson should love. But for now, let's set aside our online degree in Islamic finance from Hustlers University and talk like regular people. Something Klein and Thompson can't seem to do.
It's morning again in America. In America. In America.
Sons of real, the homeless and hungry know the truth. Please save me. They have nothing.
Are you enjoying the show? Refill your popcorn. You'll love this next part.
Abundance isn't just a policy paper. If it was, I wouldn't be wasting my time making a whole video essay about it. It's a call for a new political movement within the Democratic Party. But Klein and Thompson fail to grasp the political moment. This isn't 2008, it's 2025. They don't know what time it is. Let me give you 3 examples of what I mean. 1. Coalitional fragility. Klein and Thompson want to reforge liberalism, to build it new around, well, abundance. That's noble, I agree. We need a new liberalism and thus, ideally, a new Democratic Party. Our leaders are decrepit, our image is in the trash, and the only thing the party seems reliably good at is raising money from people it's too scared to regulate. But who exactly is abundance liberalism for? If you squint at the book, you'll notice something weird. For all its grand aspirations, abundance never seriously grapples with how any of these policies get through the political meat grinder. No base building, no identification of its opposition. So despite all its economic realism, the book ends up feeling strangely vibes-based. To their credit, Klein and Thompson even acknowledge the problem. Kinda. They write, the political economy of these ideas is fraught. And then that's it. There's very little, if anything else, when it comes to these issues. Let's think out loud for a second. Who are the reliable Democratic voters in the Trump era? Go ahead. Put your answers in the comments. Okay, pens down. If you answered suburban wine moms and the professional managerial class, congrats, you're paying attention. These are the house-rich, cash-normal homeowners. The moderately progressive, highly credentialed, often online suburbanites. And that's a problem. Because the kind of liberalism abundance is calling for, one that floods the market with housing, slashes red tape, guts local land use control, and actually gets government to do stuff, is a direct threat to most of this base's material interests. Let's not be coy. These voters do not want duplexes going up on their street. They don't want environmental review streamlined, and they sure as hell don't want anything messing with their property values. Yes, there are parts of the agenda that play fine. More doctors, cheaper childcare, stuff like that. But if your flagship policy is unpopular, you've got a real problem, because the people packing local council meetings and driving people out to vote Democrat aren't development-happy liberal technocrats. They're homeowners with time, grievances, and a firm belief that the fourplex is the end of human civilization. The book mentions this blue state NIMBYism, and then shrugs. This isn't just a tough sell, it's a political suicide mission, unless you have a plan to bribe the base or bring in new voters to counterbalance the inevitable revolt. That's literally the solution, by the way. It's not actually that complicated, and Klein and Thompson, they've got nothing. So unless the left of center faction builds a new coalition around these ideas, unless it wins back disaffected voters, especially young people who are currently disengaged, or finds new ones, the abundance agenda is dead on arrival, and nothing in this book suggests they know how to do that. So Ezra, Derek, you got a plan? Are you going to find new voters, or are you going to compromise the policy to keep the old ones? We are very, very lucky the GOP is fucking stupid. 2. Information collapse. Let's say for a moment that the Abundance Coalition could be built. Even then, there's a deeper problem. No one knows what's real anymore. One of the book's most glaring omissions is its failure to confront the actual terrain of politics today. the information space. And no, I'm not just talking about misinformation. I mean full-scale reality fragmentation. People aren't just misled, they live in entirely different worlds. Yes, this critique is cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. What's strange is that abundance seems to understand this by nature of its very existence. It is, after all, an attempt to craft a new narrative for liberal elites in the public, but it never stops to ask a more basic question. Can that story even be heard right now? Even if they win, even if they pass their policies, will it matter? And if not, how do you fix that? Klein and Thompson take an economistic view. Fix material conditions, and the culture will follow. But here's the problem with that. Our economic crisis is really just not that bad. I'm not saying there are no economic problems. I am the last to say that. But it's not the Great Depression. And this is the response? Why is our choice between the new Sulla and whatever gay space communism the left is dreaming up? Because something deeper is broken. And it's not GDP, it's meaning. We built a media ecosystem so fragmented, so absurd, that people can't even identify their own self-interest. That's not just some little glitch, that's a market failure in the meaning economy. And here's the scary part, like any true market failure, it won't fix itself. If we don't build institutions capable of restoring a shared baseline of reality, we may only reset after catastrophe. Economic collapse, climate disaster, war, something big enough to slap us back into consensus with some connection to facts. And even then, it might not stick. Democrats are stuck in a kind of policy literalism. They think good policy equals good outcomes equals good politics. But people don't experience policy. They experience stories about policy. And that filter is getting thicker, not thinner. Republicans, meanwhile, have built the most effective narrative machine in American political history since Madison Avenue. And their policies? Shit. Their outcomes? Even worse. But they remain competitive because the story works. Klein and Thompson write from inside this liberal blind spot. They're responding to a narrative collapse by designing more policy, stacked on top of a crumbling perceptual foundation. But the story always comes first. If Democrats want to build anything lasting, they need a narrative strategy as serious and well-funded as policy, not an afterthought, but a core pillar of the project. And it has to be as aggressive, brutal, and relentless as the GOP's. And what do we do as a society? After all, liberals will need to fix this at the level of the state, or else the wheel of samsara will yet turn once again. There's so much more I could say, but that's for another video. This one is already way too long. But I'll give a pointer. In the 20th century, liberals realized laissez-faire economics no longer worked. The solution was regulate for competition, because the old framework of leaving stuff alone had its limits. Similarly, liberalism has long assumed that if you leave culture alone, it will self-correct. This no longer holds. A new era demands a new theory of cultural governance, one that treats information collapse as the crisis it is. A similar orientation to regulating for competition must be the new line. We must embrace a cultural dirigism, because who cares about building more housing when MS-13 is eating the cats and dogs, Ezra? We can't save liberalism, let alone society, if we don't first save reality. 3. Authoritarian risk. Even if we built the Abundance Coalition, even if we restored shared reality, abundance still misses the mark, because it completely ignores the looming authoritarian threat from the other side. Let's take a step back and talk philosophy. The state is, as many before me have said, a monopoly on violence. It's basically a weapon. A knife, a gun, pick your metaphor. The primary function of the state is to decide how and when violence is used. Klein and Thompson argue for expanding state capacity. In simple terms, state capacity is the ability of the government to actually get things done. Investing in research, building housing, managing crises, setting out social security checks, running the military, you get it. We've been talking about it this whole time. But here's the catch. Increasing state capacity is like sharpening the knife that is the state. You're making the weapon more effective. And who's holding that knife right now? Who's holding the fucking knife? This is the problem Klein and Thompson never really engage with. Their vision assumes a future where the good guys, or at least the mediocre guys, are in charge. It's like they're living in some Obama-era West Wing fantasy, where the biggest hurdle to progress is ignorance or short-sightedness, not malevolence. But the book was written in fucking January. Look, If the opposition were still made up of Romneys, Reagans, and Ryans, I'd be more open to the idea of increasing state capacity. Sure, I'd still have my disagreements with those three R words, but they're not fascists. They might do things I think are wrong. Sometimes very wrong. But they're not utterly depraved. And if you think they are, you don't know what fascism is. But MAGA, that's a different beast entirely. The other side is currently, to borrow a phrase from political philosophy, freebasing a nightmare cocktail of Schmidt and Buchanan. Let's play this out. Let's say Klein and Thompson get their way. Let's say the Democrats win in 2028, and frankly, I'm not entirely sure there will even be a 2028, cruising in on the abundance agenda and making Klein and Thompson co-consuls of the American Republic. What happens in 2032? Or 2036? What happens when MAGA, or whatever successor movement takes over, has a far more competent state at their disposal? Let me illustrate with a historical example. Before World War II, the Netherlands had a census. The French didn't. Because of the Dutch census, when the Holocaust happened, the Dutch Jewish population was wiped out, while the French Jewish population kind of managed to survive. Now, I'm not saying Trump or his successors are going to start a Holocaust. Of course not. But what if we replace Holocaust with internment camps? How much easier would it be to round people up and send them to CCOT if the American state were generally more effective? We have been granted one mercy, that, for the most part, our enemies are complete fucking lunatics. The Trump administration and its acolytes, from Doge to Vance, are hardly playing 4D chess. They seem genuinely convinced that somewhere deep in the bureaucracy, maybe at USAID, maybe at NOAA, or maybe even the Department of Education, lurks the shadowy queen of the woke hive mind. And if they just shut down enough agencies, they'll finally eradicate it. It's delusional, but it's nice for long-term survival to have a delusional enemy. But while we might hope they'll stumble into irrelevance by decimating their own state capacity, we can't rely on that. A more competent authoritarian movement with a stronger state, that would be a catastrophe. The point is, they don't know what time it is. We don't just improve the state and hope for the best. Until MAGA is annihilated, we have to deny these tools to the enemy. Full stop. It's time to scorch Earth. Abundance tries to do a lot. It wants to recenter liberalism around the real, the material, and the makeable. Klein and Thompson set out to craft a new political vision, one grounded in abundance for all, and really believing, despite everything, that the future can still be good. And you know what? That's admirable. But while abundance is well-intentioned, it ultimately fails to meet the moment. Klein and Thompson want to solve real economic problems with real policy. Housing shortages, build. Climate change, innovate. Medical stagnation, fund research. Their goal is to rebuild faith in liberal governance through competent action. And this would be good. However, as I've outlined in this harrowing and probably too long journey, the book crumbles repeatedly where it matters most. They ignore land, the most fundamental bottleneck to housing abundance. They leave Georgism on the table like it's a cursed object instead of the cleanest tax in all of economics. They propose a movement with no coalition, no base, and no plan to resolve the direct conflict at the heart of their agenda. Namely, that their most loyal voters will fight it with knives. They design policy in a world where narrative shapes reality, and yet never ask whether anyone's even listening or capable of listening anymore. And most damningly, they imagine a bigger, better state without seriously considering who might one day control it. Because apparently, what if a fascist gets elected is still not considered something worth worrying about. So yes, abundance is a step forward, but it's a half step. And we are not in a half-step moment. We are in a sprint or die moment. We are in a knife fight in the mud moment. I don't want to discourage the project. Seriously, abundance moved the needle. It has given some liberals something to organize around that isn't navel-gazing intersectional grievance politics. But if this movement wants to live, truly live, it has to go further. It has to confront the land problem. It has to build a new coalition. It has to treat information collapse as a central crisis, not as a side quest. And it has to reckon with the fact that the state right now is a weapon currently pointed at its own people. This is the task. Because if we don't figure this out, if liberalism doesn't evolve into something capable of handling 21st century problems, then someone else will write the story of this era.